Hello everyone, this is Bob and Threadbare, and welcome back to Weaving Worlds. Today we'll discuss a problem that can strike authors of just about any experience level, and which can surface when you're creating a setting, creating a story, or at any point in between. I'm talking about that old boogeyman called writer's block, which is when you know you can write something, and you know you have the time to write something, and yet when you sit down and you take out your keyboard or your artist supplies or what have you, nothing comes out. Banging your head directly against a writer's block will never get you anywhere, but there are ways of getting around a block that can maintain your productivity and put your mind back into motion. Number 1, work on your outline. What I mean by this is that you should take a step back from whatever details or scenes are troubling you. Zoom out so that you can see the bigger picture and remind yourself of where you want your creation to end up. And if you can't see how you're supposed to get there from where you are now, then start breaking the outline down into smaller steps until you have enough dots to connect them all together. Let me give you an example. Say you're writing a fantasy novel about a knight who wants to win the affections of their one true love. They can do so by acting chivalrous and winning glory, but those are some very broad categories that don't really narrow down your options. So take a step back from whatever the knight is doing now and make a choice. Have there be an evil wizard raising an army of zombies, and then the knight will save the kingdom by defeating them. And now that you've got a more specific task, let's divide that up. The knight will need companions for this quest, and so the first thing they need to do is go and recruit some. Now you have something for the knight to do immediately, and so your writing can continue. Number 2, change the subject. A story is very rarely straight and simple, and a good setting should avoid being uniform and predictable. What this means is that you can afford to change tacks sometimes and go and do something completely different for a while, something you're more enthusiastic about. By going off on a tangent, you give your brain a chance to reset, and your characters may end up in a new place that lets you bypass the scenario that led to your writer's block. For instance, let's imagine that your hero and villain are in a tense duel, a one-on-one encounter that can only end with one of them dead on the ground. The problem is that you're only midway through the story, and you need both characters to survive the duel so that the story can continue. If you can't imagine how you can do it without someone foolishly letting the other one get away, why not change the subject instead? Cut away from the duel to some other high-stakes moment featuring some side characters, and only return to the protagonist after the duel is over. Something happened that allowed both characters to survive, but the hero doesn't want to talk about it. That will let you buy some time to come up with a satisfying resolution, which you will reveal only once the hero is finally ready to spill the beans. You can also use this gap to take in some audience speculation, and pick the best of their theories. Number 3, introduce a new element. Instead of changing the subject or skipping past a difficult bit, what if something unexpected happened instead? Like in that dueling example from earlier. What if a third party jumped in and threatened both characters? Or what if an earthquake struck and forced both duelists to run for cover and forget about the fight? You might call such a moment a deus ex machina, and you might be right about it, but here's the dirty secret about those. If you establish the possibility of intervention somewhere earlier in your work, then the audience won't mind when that intervention comes to pass. Thus, what could be lame and a cop-out will instead be clever and unexpected. Of course, this does mean that you'll have to go back and create that establishing moment, and that can be easy or hard depending on where you are in the story and how much of it you've released so far. If you can't just go back and add a new scene to establish your deus ex machina, then you do still have a couple of other options available. First, you can check through your earlier story to see if there's anything you've hinted at that you could use as an intervention. At the time, you might have thought you were establishing setting lore or adding character details, but if that element you added can intervene now, then what you actually did was prepare for this intervention, and no one will say differently. Your second option is to establish your intervention afterwards, by having your characters explain what just happened and how it didn't really come out of nowhere. It's not as satisfying as establishing it beforehand, but it's still better than nothing. Number 4. Consider a new perspective. Often, as a storyteller, you can trap yourself into thinking of a situation from only one point of view. The protagonist sees things one way, and so that's the way things are. Or if we're talking about a setting, then the primary nation or fantasy race has a certain view of the world, and that view is the only one that matters. But this approach is limiting, and the world could look completely different from someone else's point of view. So, if your story or setting is trapped with no good way to move forward, maybe take a look at the problem from some other character's perspective. Let's say you're creating a cyberpunk webcomic that features a vast population of tunnel dwellers, mole people, who want to rise up and kill all the people who live above the surface. Your protagonist is a police officer who is sympathetic to their plight but who doesn't want them to commit genocide. So they want to go to the surface to warn people about the coming attack, but they also fell in love with the leader of the mole people and don't want anything bad to happen to them. So what do? Well, what does the underground leader want to do now that they've fallen in love with a surfacer? What would their lieutenants think? What about the protagonist's partner or superior officer? If one of these other characters were to take action, then the situation would change, and suddenly the protagonist's dilemma no longer matters. Number 5. Consume new art. Your imagination is not some magical font of original ideas and fresh perspectives. It's a place in your mind where existing ideas are broken down into their component parts and rearranged. What this means is that you need to feed your imagination regularly by consuming new stories and new artwork so that you can build up a fresh batch of components. If you can't imagine any way past a particular obstacle in your story, then maybe your imagination should get some fresh material. Let me add to that you should not restrict yourself to works that are in the same medium and genre as the story you're creating. Works within a narrow genre tend to use a narrow set of conventions and story beats, and that doesn't give your imagination a lot of new material to work with. Instead, you should let yourself experience a wide variety of stories and genres, because something that's conventional in one kind of story could turn out to be unconventional and interesting in a different genre. Number 6. Ask for advice. No one person has all the answers, and sometimes when you look for a new perspective, you can find one in a friend or a family member. Not only do they have their own approach to the world based on their age, gender, and every other factor, but they also have their own favorite stories, and it could be that one of those has the answer or the idea that you're looking for. Number 7. Accept the bad and the boring. Sometimes the reason you get stuck is not because you can't see a way forward, but because the way forward you can see is not the way you want to go. Maybe to you it seems like it would be boring or simplistic, or maybe it feels like a bad idea that would derail the story, or be a case of bad or predictable storytelling. You might be right about that, but then again, you might also be wrong. It could be that you're too close to the story to understand how your audience will see it, or you're demanding more of yourself than you need to. And who knows, maybe the story's new direction will be better than the one you started with. And even if you're right, so what? Go ahead, write that bad or boring section anyway. You can always come back later and spruce things up, but you'll never get that chance if you let yourself get stuck here and now. And even if you never revise the section, a story with a bad bit or a boring part is better than an incomplete story. So power through and get the work done, because sometimes that's the only way forward. Writer's block can be a real challenge, but it's not an insurmountable one. Professional writers experience writer's block just as often as amateurs, but they maintain their production level because they have a number of tricks they can use to keep going regardless. Making use of these tricks does require some practice, same as any other skill, but at the very least, I hope this list has given you a place to start. Thanks for joining me again for today's journey into Weaving Worlds. Please like, share, and subscribe because that raises my visibility here on YouTube. Check out my other stuff if you have some time, support me on Patreon if you have some money, and I hope I'll see you again for the next video.